Welcome, everyone. Warm welcome for everyone who's joined the session. We are still waiting for one of our panelists, but I think we'll just get going right now with the event. So again, very warm welcome to this session. This panel will reflect on the roles of science attachés in science diplomacy, and more particularly in steering and strengthening bilateral scientific collaborations. We understand better what their roles are to address how they may have changed or need to change as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. One thing that is unequivocal, ensuring growth and equitable recovery in the post-pandemic world is paramount. And we know that science diplomats have an important role to play in unlocking and fostering cooperation between scientists, entrepreneurs, diplomats, and policymakers. As we have witnessed during this pandemic, the science policy and diplomacy interfaces are absolutely key and need to be improved. So to discuss this, today we are very lucky to have with us many representatives and stakeholders of the science diplomacy ecosystem, both in Canada and in the UK, including Dr. from the High Commission of Canada in the UK, which we're to join slight technical issues and delays. Mr. from the High Commission of the UK and Canada, Madame Sonny Rathod from the UK Research and Agency, Mr. Pierre-Philippe Couture from the Ministère de l'Économie et de l'Innovation de Québec, and Dr. Madison Rinning from Optonics, Quebec's Cluster for Excellence in Optonics. So I will introduce each of our panelists one by one in this order and in more detail in a moment, and we'll let them in turn expand 2-3 minutes after each of my introductions, so to know them and their work a little better. As for me, my name is Dr. I'm a lecturer at University College London in the Department of Science, Technology, Engineering, and Public Policy. My research focuses on science diplomacy broadly, but part of it looks at science attachés in particular. Throughout the pandemic, several science attachés and myself were actually in contact and took stock of what the crisis revealed about science diplomacy interfaces and what for their work. If you would like, you can read about it further in our article that was published in Science and Diplomacy, the journal published by the American Association for the Advancement of Science, and the link will be included in the chat. The panel is co-organized by the Government of Quebec and the United Kingdom Science and Innovation Network. And I would like to acknowledge the panel organizers themselves, Dr. Jean-Christian Lemay, Research and Innovation Attaché at the Quebec Government Office in London, and Dr. Mario Rivero-Huguet, Head of Science and Innovation General in Montreal. So thank you very much, both and all of you, for your kind invitation in moderating this panel and contributing to it. Also we'd like to also thank CSPC and the many other colleagues who helped in the organization of this panel, in particular Dr. Angela Zhu, our CSPC contact point. So after this brief introduction, just wanted to let everybody know of the format of the panel. So we'll start with one-by-one introductions, followed by 2-3 minutes of more detail provided by each speaker in turn that we'll have introduced. Then we'll go into a few questions to the panel, into a more general Q&A. We would like to make this possible, so we encourage you to ask questions during the panel. We'll be monitoring the chat, and if we cannot answer them on the spot, we will take them whenever possible and during the Q&A. We also aim to circulate during the events, so please participate if you can. It'll make this session even more interactive and bring you, the audience, into this event. So without further ado, I see everybody is here. Do we have Caroline yet or not? Do I see Caroline in the room? Not yet. Okay, all right. So while we wait for Caroline, I will go in a very random order, but let's see. I will start by introducing Mr. Sam Jeremy. Sam Jeremy is the head of Science and Innovation Network in Canada, responsible for promoting and growing UK-Canada science relations. Director for Atlantic Canada, growing Atlantic provinces, and oversees the High Commission's communications output. Sam arrived in Ottawa in 2018, prior to which he led the Foreign and Security Policy team in Moscow. Other postings have included leading the economics team at the British Embassy in Baghdad and leading UK policy at the African Union in Addis Ababa in Ethiopia. So before joining the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, Sam worked as an electrical engineer. So Sam, welcome to the panel. I meant to have Caroline go first, but I'm very glad that you can, if you don't mind. So just expand on your work a little bit and tell us what you do as a day-to-day.
Yes, no problem, Jean-Christophe. Thanks very much, and thank you to everyone who's joining us today, and welcome to the panel. So Jean-Christophe explained, I'm what we would actually call in our system a generalist diplomat by background, who by chance also happens to have an engineering background, but that was now quite some years ago. And prior to coming to Canada, I actually worked predominantly on foreign and security and defense policy. So this has been, for me, really nice to get my sort of route as an engineer and work a lot more on science and engineering topics. But here in I head a team of 7 people we have across Canada, 7 science attaches based in 5 cities in Canada across the country, all of whom are Canadian citizens and all of whom, generally speaking, have a science and policy background themselves. So that's one of the key when we build the team and bring people on board. And so what do we all do? I mean, we do a variety of things. We track developments on key scientific developments that are of interest to the UK. A lot of what we do is fostering connectivity and connections between the UK and Canada. Areas where we try to have much more concrete outcomes. To cite a couple of examples, we will focus in very heavily on things like quantum computing, artificial intelligence, decarbonisation innovations, and most recently, of course, health and pandemic preparedness. In each of these cases, it's the job of the team of, in total, 8 people to build networks, to connect experts in the UK and Canada, and they may be researchers or academics or people who are working on the policies, bring them together, share knowledge, learn from the way that Canada approaches and does things, and also explain to Canada how we're approaching policy. So I'll stop there. I know we're going to go into a lot more detail in the questions, but that in sum is, broadly speaking, what we do here.
Sam, for delving a little bit into the work that you carry. I see that Dr. Martin could join us, so welcome, Dr. Martin. So I will introduce you, if you don't mind, provide to a bit more detail about what you do in the following 2-3 minutes. So it is my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Caroline Martin. Dr. Martin is Innovation Lead at the High Commission of Canada in the United Kingdom. She has experience in facilitating research, development, and commercialization partnerships between Canada and UK in the public, private, or third sectors. This requires a close monitoring of developments in science and innovation policy and of the UK, as well as regular liaison with senior members of the government, universities, and industry, both in Canada and in the UK. Prior to taking up this role, Caroline was an associate lecturer in chemistry at the University of Cambridge and a postdoctoral research fellow at University College London. She obtained a PhD in organometallic chemistry and catalysis from Edinburgh University. So again, welcome, Caroline. The trouble in joining, and would you like to say a few words about your work in about 2-3 minutes?
Sure, thank you, and apologies for being late. So yeah, thank you for the introduction and for inviting me to be part of it. So I'm basically the science attaché based at the High Commission in London. Despite my accent, I do represent the Canadian government, part of global affairs, and I'm part of the Trade Commissioner team sitting in the London office. So I've been doing the job for over 20 years now. I'm not a diplomat. I was hired sort of as what we call them, a locally engaged staff member, really for my knowledge of the UK science and innovation ecosystem, and really for building those networks and those connections. So our role really is, well, we're very client focused. We do very reactive, whatever comes through the door on a science tech innovation basis. So that can be dealing with individual companies, individual academics, universities at a more strategic level, liaising with funders, looking for strategic opportunities, lots of things like monitoring policy and best practices. And it's really covering that landscape. Like I say, part of the Trade Commissioner Service, so we tend to be slightly more commercially focused. But London's fortunate, to have a dedicated science and innovation officer. Not all posts around the world have them, and so we cover the whole waterfront. And as Sam says, I'm sure we'll get into the details. So with that, I'll hand back. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Caroline. So in turn now, I'm going to introduce Madam Sunny Rathod. So Sunny is the head of Canada Partnerships for UK Research and Innovation and is based in Ottawa as part of a wider UKRI Northern American presence. Sunny is responsible for strengthening UKRI ties with Canada through building deeper connections with existing partners and scopes new opportunities in the urgent grant challenges and policy time. This work supports the delivery of UKRI's and the UK government's ambitions. So Sunny has worked in international holding previous posts within UKRI's discipline-facing councils. She holds a Bachelor of Science and honors degree in psychology and philosophy. So welcome. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much for that introduction, and thank you to CSPC and the panel organizers for having me here today. So I have quite an interesting role here in Ottawa. I moved to Ottawa at the end of May to essentially reflect UK research and innovation's growing relationship with Canada. And for those who don't know, UKRI is the UK's largest public funder of research and innovation in the UK, with a budget of around 17 billion Canadian dollars. International work is inherent in what we do, and Canada is one of our key priority countries. I'm really thrilled to actually be based here in Canada to work with agencies both at the federal level and provincially, including our friends in Quebec. So I kind of have a role where I wear two hats. The first one is for UK Research and Innovation as a funding agency, and working with our partners here in Canada, such as the Tri-Councils, NRC, CFI, MyTax, and many, many others, to kind of scope out and develop longer term partnerships relating to research themes, including AI, health, climate, quantum, mobility, and research infrastructures, which is obviously very essential in addressing some of the critical challenges that we're facing globally at the moment. The second hat I wear is more of a UK representational role as a diplomat. And actually my presence here is co-located at the British High Commission, and actually with Sam here in Ottawa, where we work on a range of areas together relating to kind of co-design of science and innovation aspects such as hydrogen, emerging tech, and issues around trusted research, using science as a soft power, tackling COVID-19 challenges, and more recently working together on things like COP26. So it's really great to be here and kind of add value to all of that and work closely with partners here. So I'll leave it there for now. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Sunny, for delving a little bit more into your day-to-day work. And I will move to Mr. Pierre-Philippe Couture and briefly introduce him as well. So Pierre-Philippe is currently team leader at the Direction des Partenariats Canadiens Internationaux en Innovation du ministère de l'Innovation du Québec, the MEI. He holds a Bachelor in International Relations of the University of Montreal a Master's in Public and International Affairs, as well as a Master's in Public Administration from École Nationale d'Administration in France. He has previously worked for Business France as well as the United Nations. So welcome, Pierre-Philippe. So if you want to talk a little bit more about your work.
Thank you, Jean-Christophe. So yes, I work for the Quebec Ministry of Economy and Innovation. I'm based in downtown Montreal. I work with a team of roughly 10 people focusing on priority sectors, industries, which are mainly aerospace, hydrogen, smart mobility, life sciences, and others. And we also work with what we call priority countries. So of course, UK is one of them, but we also work closely with France, Germany, Korea, Japan, and others. Quebec has roughly 10 science attachés around the world. So Jean-Christian is based in London, but we also have other science attachés in Rome, Silicon Valley, Tokyo, Munich, to name a few. And we work on a daily basis with most of them. The mandate of our team is basically to foster international collaboration in research and innovation. We work mostly with researchers based in universities and also startups and SMEs. What we're looking for is to establish international R&D projects. So it can be through, for example, Horizon 2020 and now Horizon Europe or other calls, and to fasten internationalization of startups. So we work with SMEs and startups to help them to do pilot projects with the foreign companies, test their technologies, raise money abroad, and so on. So to foster international collaboration, we organize a wide range of activities, such as welcoming foreign delegations in Quebec. We also organize webinars. We do innovation missions abroad, usually around a conference or an event. We usually co-organize these activities with the science attachés that are based around the world, because they really help us to open doors because of their great network. And they organize also B2B meetings while we are traveling. On our end, since I work at the Ministry of Economy and Innovation, we really focus on applied science and innovation. So there has to be a company involved in the project that we are trying to establish. I think I will end here for now. Thank you, Jean-Christophe.
Thank you, Pierre-Philippe. And we'll definitely delve into a little bit of the work in the next question. So the different actors we have. Thank you for that. And last but not least, it's my pleasure also to introduce Dr. Madison Rilling. Is interim general manager at Optonic, Quebec's cluster for excellence in optics and photonics. And while planning for a strong and diverse workforce, she joins her technical expertise and diplomatic experience to establish strategic collaborations across the globe and identify business development opportunities for Quebec's based companies. She works with industrial, academic, and governmental actors to develop and foster innovation within the optics and photonics ecosystem. Madison completed a master's in medical physics and a PhD in physics at Université Laval. He acted as a student advisor to Quebec's chief scientist on issues related to the funding and training opportunities for student researchers and postdocs. She is currently a member of Canada's Chief Science Advisors Youth Council and an external board member of the Science and Policy Exchange, contributing to building capacity in science policy and science diplomacy among next generation scientists, which I can definitely relate with. So, Madison, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Jean-Christophe, for the introduction. And I also want to thank CSPC and the organizers for putting this panel together. I'm really excited to be here. And I'll say I'm kind of representing a bit more, even if you heard my bio there, I'm representing a bit more of the industry side. So like Jean-Christophe mentioned, I am interim general manager at Optonic, and Optonic is the pôle d'excellence en optique photonique du Québec. So in other words, it's Quebec's provincial photonics cluster, which is mainly funded by the Quebec government through the Ministry of Economy and Innovation, to which Pierre-Philippe is attached. Optonic's role is really to federate industrial, academic, and governmental actors around structuring projects that are aimed at developing and boosting the optics and photonics ecosystem. But that being said, at its core, Optonic's mission is very industry focused, and our team is there to support startups, to support SMEs and large enterprises around, well, actually through 4 key axes of intervention. And those are employability, productivity, innovation, and commercialization. The science attachés, I would say, actually help us through a lot of those, but mainly employability, innovation, and commercialization. So like it was just mentioned, the province of Quebec does benefit from a large, or some, at least a global network of science attachés that we're really privileged to be able to work with. And these science attachés are key resources for us and partners for my team, and ultimately for companies and researchers when it comes to creating and developing international collaborations, either through connecting experts, but also for connecting companies, and more formally, like Pierre-Philippe mentioned, in organizing delegations or organizing missions where we take delegations abroad. So it's really, I really call them a key resource for us, because the Science Diplomats, it's not all a bunch of photonics specialized diplomats, but that has actually huge value for us. That general aspect, or the broad view of and knowledge of the science landscape that they have, of the territory that they represent, because it's what for us, photonics being an enabling technology that's actually used in a lot of applicative sectors. It has a lot of value in all the different connections and collaborations that we can develop abroad through them. So we're going to be talking about that soon in detail. So I'll just stop there, and we'll get to the next discussion.
Yeah, thank you very much, Madison. And thank you, everyone, for all these fascinating details about your work. I think it's quite amazing to see the diversity in actors that we have here with us today, covering a lot of ground, and also the diversity in backgrounds, which is quite amazing to see as well. And so much experience also on the panel. So I really look forward to some of your inputs today, as I'm sure the audience does as well. So talking about the audience, we are running a live poll, which may have just closed. Thanks for the help in the backstage. So if you click on live poll, you will see where our audience works. And we have about 50% civil federal servants, with 7% provincial servants in the civil service. We have about 30% from academia, which is very nice to see, and 14% that are others. So it's great to see the audience responding. If I would say, even if you could, as a member of the audience, put a small message to introduce yourself in the discussion forum, for example. Just let us know, who you are, what you do, and also start with any questions that you may have. That would be absolutely fantastic. And we'll keep running those polls also to make sure that we capture also what you're curious about as listeners, and try to have you participate as much as possible in the session as well. So currently enough to ask you whether you've been working with Science Diplomats or not. So we'll capture this while we go into a bit of the discussion. So again, thank you very much all for sharing so much experience with us and with the audience today. I think, if I may, jump on the fact that there's a great diversity in the work that you all do. You're all parts of the science diplomacy ecosystem, here mainly UK, Canada, but you do a lot of different things that can, as we heard, cover political aspect all the way to the more economic side of things. So let's say high-level policies in STI, in science, technology, and innovation, and how to spur collaboration, let's say, among countries, here, let's say the UK and Canada, or learn from policies from the various countries and how it affects policies. But we also heard about the sort of end side of the spectrum, the innovation side, the industry side, and how this also is very much core to some of your activities. So if I may maybe turn to first some of the science attachés or the ones working with science attachés, I ask you, what part of your work is on which side of the spectrum, more or less, like which priorities you have, which is it more political or economy based? And then maybe we'll let also the actors such as Madison or like Sunny also from UKRI also give their end of the focus of their activities. So maybe if I can call on Caroline or Sam or Pierre-Philippe to just give a little bit of insights to this side of the work.
Do you want to start, Sam? Shall I go first?
Why don't you go first?
Okay, I'll kick it off. Okay, so it's, as I kind of alluded to at the beginning, it really is the whole spectrum that we get involved in, but it's certainly differing degrees as to whether it's sort of on the proactive or the reactive side. From a policy perspective, we do get a lot of tasking from some of the groups within government, ISED, NRCan, some of those groups as to really best practices, where the UK, why the UK is invested in certain policies, how that will inform things going forward. So there's huge number, or there were a huge number of visits from that learning best practice perspective prior to COVID, and we're starting to see them build again now. Certainly, with COP26, and we think that's going to increase going forward. So there's certainly a lot of interest in the policy side, but a lot of it is around sort of innovation policy and how the UK's Build Back Better, and some of it's strategic links are linking into innovation and economic growth. So it's very much a continuum, and I'd say where we deal probably mostly on the proactive side of our work is in trying to identify strategic opportunities for collaboration. There's huge numbers from a bottom-up perspective, but it's really what makes most sense for Canada and the UK to collaborate on collectively. And it will probably feed into the next question, but there's a lot of monitoring of current priorities in both countries, trying to sort of monitor where some of the bottom-up stuff is coming from, because you don't want to be putting top-down things in place that there's no appetite for. So it's really trying to bridge that gap to see where we can make arguments for why Canada, why the UK, as opposed to other countries, sort of thing, and really then where the funding lies, trying to make those arguments, and then once there's a sort of certain level of interest, really trying to put that into practice through things like missions, workshops, trying to make the case and to prove, if you like, provide the evidence for why that collaboration should make sense. So a lot of our, like I said, proactive effort goes into that strategic opportunity building, and predominantly with research funders. You've got Sonny on the line who's a big part of that play, but so identification and then trying to make it happen through the missions and the workshops, and then hopefully mechanisms to make it, like funding calls or different types of partnerships, aligning things will follow on afterwards. So I think that's where I'll say our biggest role is, but we really do cover the full landscape.
Caroline, and it is definitely a spectrum of activities. So that's interesting to see, and also we'll hear more maybe from Sunny and Madison, as you said, about how they engage on that spectrum as well. And thank you also for thinking about or planning, thinking in terms of the whether it is sort of a top-down say strategy in terms of it comes from the higher whether or not you look for certain strategic collaboration as you call them, or opportunities, if you will, or if there's a little bit of leeway also on your end to do it with a level of independence and looking for opportunities that may not be seen from the home country as well. So we'll delve into this a little bit further down the line. But maybe Sam, you wanted to add something in terms of the SDI spectrum, of what you look at or what your team looks at.
Yeah, certainly. So you won't be surprised to hear that that we do very similar work to what Caroline does, because we're basically at opposite ends of the spectrum. I'm sitting here in Ottawa and Caroline's in London, so we're in very close contact. And it is a very similar picture, basically. I think if we can speak for to this question of how we prioritize or what we pick. I mean, we do work across the full spectrum, and we frequently have demands from, every corner of the British government will send us questions, sometimes on quite obscure topics which they want us to find out details about. But on the whole, we do exactly the same we approach this exactly the same way Caroline does. So we look at things right now from a UK government perspective, and it's things, as I mentioned before, like emerging technologies, artificial intelligence, quantum, which have really significant future ramifications. Obviously, health and pandemic preparedness in the last couple of years. And then clearly also the net zero agenda and decarbonisation. So we know what is the priority for the UK government. And then we talk to Caroline, to colleagues here in the Canadian government in Ottawa, and we understand what are the priorities for the Canadian government. And often, actually, it's very similar things you won't be surprised to hear. And we can then work out where the greatest potential for collaboration lies. And that's really the process we go through. We went through this recently with a senior officials meeting with the Canadian and British governments, and we identified 3 areas, exactly the same areas: health, emerging technology and data, and clean growth and climate. And then from that, we try to drill down one level even further and pick some really concrete things to focus on and some concrete outcomes to try to achieve. So that's pretty much how, working together, we pick from to be honest, what could be an extremely wide range of topics, but which we don't have resources to do justice to, and try and narrow down and hone in onto stuff where we can really achieve some concrete outcomes.
Thank you, Sam. Yeah, so I guess there's a little bit of choice that is made at some level in terms of the topics that will be sort of the ones that you will focus your efforts. An interesting remark to see how this is already potentially set, but you sort of have a level of independence in any case within those pillars to work out those the strategic opportunities as Caroline defined them. So thanks for that. Pierre-Philippe, would you want to add anything to this as well?
Yeah, sure. Very quickly, as Caroline mentioned, identifying potential fruitful collaboration is really the key mandate of science attachés. On our end, we work hand in hand with science attachés on identifying the events that we want to work on and which should be prioritized in regards of our strategies, the political will of our ministry, and the industry priorities. Every year around February and March, we sit down to choose together what type of activities, events, missions, webinars, and so on we want to organize through the year. To help us to make up our choices, we go through the main political priorities of our government for the year, but we also get in touch with some of our customers, so companies, researchers, but also clusters, such as Madison is representing, to get to know their interests and objectives for the upcoming year. So I would say we work with science attachés mainly through an economic focus, as there are very, as I mentioned before, to identify potential partners, set up B2B meetings, attract potential funding to Quebec, and so on. And we have a lot of great example in the past years, such as the Genesis mission in life sciences, the UK Canada Hydrogen Week, the farm were organized usually every 2 years in the aerospace industry. So we have a lot of ongoing missions and events that we organize jointly with science attachés.
Philippe, you mentioned those sort of consultation processes with what you refer to as your customers, right? Which I guess you would fall into that category, and how you in a way co-define some of your objectives and identify these opportunities through those discussions. So that's very interesting to hear that. Maybe I'll let then naturally Madison then react to that quote unquote customer side of the equation, and then maybe I'll call on Sunny to provide a little bit more of perspective on how you work with potentially Sam and Caroline and these kinds of actors. So Madison, if you want to just react to maybe Pierre-Philippe or how your work is enhanced by science attachés, or how you would like to see it done.
Well, it's really interesting for me because when you guys heard a bit about my bio, I was involved in getting the next gen involved in science policy and science diplomacy, and now being on the side of the equation where we're using their services and now trying to understand how to best optimize how we work together too. And one thing that I don't want to repeat what everyone's been saying, but maybe just emphasize the fact that I think very, very frequent dialogue between the end users and the science attachés is very important. So we have science attachés across the world, and they all represent their own territory, and they're very well aware of the strategic and the government priorities of the territory that they represent. So that bilateral understanding of their own government and the government that they on the territory on which they work is really important for us, because we do have a certain, for me as a cluster, we have an international focus, but at the same time, we're not as aware as they are of the government priorities. Like, for example, in the UK case, I work with the Jean-Christian, and for example, when the recent innovation strategy came out, he's going to digest the strategy for us and give us input on what are the key opportunities, especially as it relates to photonics. So having that frequent dialogue is really important. Sometimes it's also just they're going to be at a lot of events, and they're continuously growing their network, and there's maybe like an informal part that's also just turning back to me to say, like, hey Madison, what expertise do we have in Quebec in this area, or what company? It can be like for researchers, but it can also be for companies. And it's also just being able to connect experts and create collaborations when possible. But it's also in a more formal way when we really organize missions. Then what's really valuable for us, it's being able to organize every step of that mission. And that's from sometimes involving government officials, but it's also meeting universities. It's also meeting companies on all levels of like from manufacturers to, so all types of companies. So we really benefit from their services in actually so many different ways. And I would add also one way in which we benefit, it's not just creating collaborations, but it's also from a point of view of talent attraction. So the collaborations that can attract talent to Quebec and also create opportunities for our talent to go abroad. So that's all valuable for developing our optics and photonics ecosystem. So there's a lot of different ways in which we actually benefit from the work that the science attachés do abroad for us.
Yeah, thanks, Madison, and it's great to hear from an industry in this respect and how you interact with science attachés. I guess we'll delve a little bit more down the line in this panel about what could be done better, or if you will, what COVID has done to the disruption that COVID-19 has brought about, and how to make moving forward. So, but before that, maybe. Sunny, I just wanted to move over to you a little bit and see how you actually are part, or UKRI is part of this network. You said you have two hats as well. So if you want to expand a little bit on that as well, how that's
sure. Yeah, thank you. So as a funding agency, we rely heavily on evidence to make informed investments for our funding. obviously more and more we need to show the benefit of investments to government. That's how we get our budget. And the science attaches are absolutely crucial to enabling that evidence. As Caroline and others have said, the workshops they convene, the dialogues that they bring together are all like a basis of forming that information and evidence for us, and really helping, funders understand where some of those kind of bottom-up opportunities are and how they marry up then with sort of the top-down government drivers. Also, for UKRI, Canada is a trusted partner for us, and we like to think we can have open and honest conversations about what's going on. And the science attaches, again, are absolutely crucial to do this, whether I'm talking to Sam, whether I'm talking to Jean-Christian in the London, Quebec office, or Caroline, or whoever it might be. Having that open and honest dialogue really does help kind of build that relationship. So there's a lot the science attaches do, and I think we would be lost without them, because they have this amazing ability to have a broad perspective on everything going on, and as a funder I can kind of come in and cherry pick the bits that I need then to be able to do my job effectively. So really thank you to the science attaches for helping make my job a little bit easier.
Sunny, for that. Those very nice remarks. And if I may, I think the return on investment on a science attaché network is something that is not yet fully explored, and it's something that governments actually at the department we have a PhD student that's actually working on this topic, on this very topic. I think it's we need to. We hear this positive, right, feedback about the work of science attachés. Everybody knows that it's key to many different actors, and that it will be key moving forward post COVID-19 as well. But interestingly, there are many countries that do not have science attaché networks, and here we have countries that do have extensive networks and or developing their own networks, even at the regional level, as we know with Quebec, for example. But it is not something that's fully widespread. And so making the case for why such networks are crucial during a pandemic, before a pandemic, during a pandemic, and after a pandemic is absolutely key. So on this, I just wanted to draw your attention to the live poll that just ended as well. It's still live. And the question was, have you been working with Science Diplomats? And we have actually 40% that said yes, before COVID, I was working with Science Diplomats. 24% that said that they were working with Science Diplomats during COVID-19. But we do have 35% that say never before, right? So I think we should also make sure that that we address, the questions of those who have never really either do not necessarily know of the work of science diplomats and science attachés, or have not interacted with them and potentially would like to, right? So we'll try to make sure that that we capture a little bit of the functions of these networks and what they can do in a post-COVID-19 world in terms of recovery and global governance during this panel. And I also want to draw your attention to the discussion forum, where a few of our audience members have introduced themselves, where we have science attachés for the Quebec government, actually some that I know myself. So hello to those who joined us. And we have science policy analysts, have science policy fellows in Canada. So very, very interesting to see the different members of the audience. So please, the audience, it would be, if it were not online, we would be seeing your faces, we would be interacting with you. It's a complicated environment for everybody to be fully online. So if you can post messages, interact with us, ask questions, it would be absolutely fantastic. So again, thank you for your contributions on these questions of activities, on the spectrum of activities that you cover, from basic science collaboration all the way to involving industry, as well as looking at high-level policies and how they affect your respective countries and hence feed into your work. We briefly touched upon the way that your work is set, whether it is top-down or bottom-up, if there is a level of independence, the choices that you make. But maybe we dwell on it too much because I see time is moving, and I would like to maybe go towards a little bit on the dichotomy between collaboration and competition when it comes to the dichotomy between national interest and the international interests, right? We know that there is a lot of power in scientific collaboration, and this crisis has shown us this in solving global challenges, and we need collaboration. We need those networks to talk to each other, and we need all actors involved, right, from funders to industry to policy actors and to scientists. Yet a network does answer to its nation state or its region, right? And for many have also some form of science attaché or SNT experts within their representations abroad. So my question is, how do you reconcile both sides of the equation, the sort of national interest and the need for collaboration on the global stage? So I don't know, it's a big question to ask, I know, but does anyone want to venture in answering this? How do you manage both of these aspects, both competition and collaboration?
I'm happy to jump in first and get the ball rolling. There's a couple of thoughts I've had, which I'll share. So it's interesting, kind of being a UK funder based here in Canada, and just seeing the sort of evolving trends and opportunities going on. I mean, sort of more recently in the last 18 months, sort of for me being here, I'm thinking, okay, so the Canada-US relationship is growing closer again, particularly in relation to science and innovation. What does that mean for the UK, and where does that kind of leave us? And so it's kind of thinking about, some of the opportunities potentially relating to that trilateral relationship, and then kind of thinking bilaterally between UK and Canada. It's impossible to do everything with everyone when you're talking about international partnerships. So it's really looking at where those sort of pockets of excellence and synergies and opportunities are that add value to, I think, both countries. And often it takes a lot of work to find that. Sometimes it's quite obvious, but I think, trying to bring all of that together, the balls fall into the right place. And I think kind of working jointly with the science attachés and other partners in doing that is super helpful.
Thank you, Sunny. Maybe, yeah, sorry, Sam, was that you?
That was me, yeah. I was just going to follow Sunny up, since obviously I work very closely with Sunny, and say that I can't think, since I started this job, of any example of when I felt we were in competition. It's always about collaboration with Canada. And I think it's because in the end, our countries are so like-minded, whether that be on values, and we're looking at regulation or ethics, whether it be on the strength of our science base, the way it's structured, and so the ease of working together. But also I think it's because it's it tends to be rather than perhaps companies which are marketing product in the case of what we do, and so perhaps going to compete with each other. It's more a case of trying to find experts and bring them together and create new knowledge or solutions. And then finally, because on many of the technologies, they're emerging, they haven't even emerged yet. And so we're trying to work again as like-minded countries to develop strengths in technology, which is in our interest to do as two close allies on things like quantum, on AI. So yeah, I can't think of any example. I mean, but there will be examples, I'm sure, where you have technologies which have progressed to marketable phase, where perhaps there is an element of competition, but that would be more for the trade departments who work on these things rather than us as science attachés. That's certainly my experience.
Yeah, I mean, I can jump in and certainly echo that. And I've been doing the job a long time, and I haven't really ever had huge issue in terms of competition. I mean, just in terms of the Canada sort of UK relationship and competition with other countries, I mean, you know, Brexit, yeah, disaster in lots of phases, but it's been great for the Canada-UK science relationship. I've certainly not had to wave the flag as hard in the UK in the last, you know, 4 or 5 years as I used to have to get noticed before. So I guess that's a stage of competition. The other thing I'd like to sort of just bring to the fore, and it's maybe not exactly what you're looking for, but and where we have to be slightly sensitive is around interprovincial competition with the UK. You know, quite often the UK wants to, especially when we're talking about strategic collaboration, they want to work with Canada. They don't want to work with 6 different forms of Canada. And there's, you know, sometimes there are times that the same organization is approached from, you know, 3, 4, 5 different provinces wanting a partnership sort of thing. And so we have to try and balance that a little bit in the UK. I can say, because we're with Quebec is brilliant at this. You know, they're looking at partnerships with Scotland, with Wales, you know, and a very active partnerships in the broader, you know, national collaborations. But that's just one area we have to sort of look at. Luckily, the areas of that we're focusing on, we're covering most of the country through ag tech in the prairie regions, marine robotics, just back from a mission on marine robotics with Atlantic Canada. You know, all the biomanufacturing and the life science strengths of BC. And so we are covering the gamut, but we do have to be a little bit careful, because there are times when we get approached by our UK partners saying, yes, we want to work with Canada, but we want to work with Canada, as opposed to, you know, 6 different agreements to be able to work. So we have to, you know, balance that and explain the politics, and especially around health and health data and, you know, provincial mandates, etc. So I'm not sure if that's exactly, but that's probably the area, you know, where there is a little bit of competition we have to deal with, but it's internal competition. So
that's a very interesting point, Caroline. Thank you. And maybe Pierre-Philippe wants to add or react to this, indeed, in terms of the regional governments and the network of science attachés of Quebec, who are now also very, very active. So if you want to say a word about this, Pierre-Philippe.
Yes, thank you. I see my camera is flashing, but hopefully you can hear me well. As it was quickly mentioned by Caroline, Quebec is a federated state or province, so we often work with other similar regions. For instance, we work closely with Wales. We signed a declaration of intent in early 2020, and since then there has been 2 calls for projects, as an example, and the majority of the founded projects have been on research and innovation. So we work closely with to share the info and the call for projects through their networks. And here in Montreal, we evaluate with our colleagues in the UK the different projects that are submitted. So I would say, of course, there's some competition internally in Canada. Also throughout the world, especially since the funding is so limited. But at the same time, this competition internally and internationally guarantees that the stakeholders have support the best R&D projects with the highest potential outcomes. So I think this is it's fine competition. But to go back to your question, Jean-Christophe, I think collaboration for sure is the way to go to accelerate the transfer and commercialization of innovations. So this is why at the Quebec government we've listed roughly 15 to 20 priority countries and regions throughout the world with which we want to work on more specifically. So this short list was made basically by looking through the innovation index, historical collaborations, current funding of research and innovation, and so on. So of course, UK has always been high on this list. such as other countries like Korea, Japan, Germany, and others. And so we intensify our relationship with these countries to try to maximize the outcomes, the international research and innovation projects that we want to support.
Okay, Philippe. I think maybe this topic of competition and versus collaboration doesn't have to be a dichotomy per se, right? I mean, competition can lead to also collaboration down in the end, and can be healthy. And I think that's in a way probably true for industry as well, right? So to Madison a little bit also to get your inputs on this. And if you don't mind, Madison, I know that Caroline, told us about, or we talked about a little bit about the provincial, and regional, their own networks of science attachés, and I know that the Science and Policy Exchange, which was an organization that stems from early researchers or young students in Canada and Quebec, was quite key in bringing about also this network in Quebec. So if you want also to touch upon this, if you want. So first, maybe from your industry perspective on the competition collaboration, and then a little bit on the regional science attaché network.
Yeah, definitely. That's actually a really good point. And so just to touch on that industry point, like naively, before I got into this, I would have thought that maybe the industry side would tend to be more competitive, but like I'm not teaching you guys anything new, obviously, when I say this, but the essence of diplomacy, be it scientific or other, is based on collaboration. And science is a great platform to connect across geographic frontiers, to advance science, to create new research-based opportunities, and from an industry perspective for business development as well. Especially with the reality that we're living now with the problems with the supply chain, these collaborations are really important for our companies who are having to rethink sometimes products or different services that they offer now that they can't offer as quickly, or they're just literally missing pieces to be able to provide what they usually offer. So they have to reinvent the way that they're working and find sometimes either companies or companies, or sometimes even researchers to reinvent their processes, reinvent their services, reinvent their products. So all of this is through collaborations abroad, and speaking specifically to my industry, so the photonics industry in Quebec is one that exports at 92%. So our companies do rely really strongly on new collaborations and partnerships that stem from government representatives abroad to penetrate international markets and to benefit from expertise that doesn't exist back home. So the role that the science attachés provide us with cultural background, technical background, and policy expertise as well of the territory on which they work. And this is really useful in creating something that it's not competition, but really creating like a win-win situation for companies here and companies abroad. But that's also the case for academia here, academia abroad. Our attachés, one thing I'd add is that they're really good at leveraging the tools that they have to create those opportunities. For example, you can just talk about MyTax internships, scholarships. Like sometimes that's a really good tool for talent attraction, but also for creating different links between between the photonics ecosystems. So it's really we really work in a mindset of collaboration, and in the end it's just creating that win-win situation, even if sometimes it does seem like there's a bit of competition. Like talent attraction is one where everyone is kind of competing for talent because everyone is missing talent, but in the end it's just about finding the opportunities in which each government, or let's say for us, each ecosystem can really benefit based on what's aligned with the government priorities and the industry priorities. And Jean-Christophe, just to that point that you mentioned about this part of the Science Attaché network that came to life. So that was actually with the Comité intersectoriel étudiant des fonds de recherche du Québec that worked with the chief science advisor, so Rémi Quirion, with his office. And so it was a collaboration between les fonds de recherche and Logique at that time with the ministère des Relations Internationales. So to bring that forward. So at first it was actually a postdoc fellowship, and that Jean-Christian Lemay that you guys mentioned, he was one of the fellows that participated in the very first pilot project. And so it was to engage the next generation in that science diplomacy role. So it was something that the offices really appreciated. And as we're hearing today, it echoed in so many different ways. It had very concrete repercussions for different ecosystems. And I feel it in the photonics ecosystem, but I can just from all the testimonies that everyone's giving today, it really had a lot of amazing impacts from a diplomatic point of view, from an economical point of view, from science research and innovation point of view. And I would say that we just need more of these. And you talked about science and policy exchange at the beginning, but that group it's a nonprofit organization that involves and helps to train the next gen of scientists in science policy, but also in science diplomacy. So if there's any early career researchers with us today, do look into science and policy exchange, because there's always opportunities to learn about science diplomacy and also get involved in it as well.
Madison, for providing these insights from industry as well as from the young researchers side, and your involvement in the science policy exchange. It is a fascinating thing to see a network that's been, in a way, ECR or young or students led in a way, and with the Quebec Chief Science Advisor, Rémi Quirion, as well, to move it forward. And it's interesting to see how it was cemented from a fellowships program all the way to now official science attaché positions. So it's an interesting inspiration for other countries as well who want to develop their own science attaché networks. And we've talked a little bit on this panel about return on investment, or the value that science attachés bring to all kinds of actors, from government, policy, funders, industry, academia, and whatnot. And I think we can really see that, through these initiatives growing, we can see that value, even though it hasn't been measured in numbers. We can definitely see the value that these networks have. Before we move on to maybe a final question, before we open also the floor to more Q&A from the audience, and the final question being more about the pandemic, and your thoughts about how to improve these networks. I wanted to go back to the poll that was launched, and looking at asking the audience which aspects of the Science Diplomats work you find interesting or helpful. And we have 40% saying that informing and influencing science policy is something that they find particularly interesting and helpful. 35% for answered joint developing activities, and 25% identifying academic, industry, and SMEs as partners. So, of course, this might be biased by who we have in the room in terms of our audience, but nonetheless, interesting to see that the results of that poll. And the interface is a little complex to navigate, because we have the panelists, we have the polls, we have the discussion forum, the live Q&A, everything. So it's very rich. So I'm monitoring the discussion forum for any questions that the audience may have. So if you want to post your question there, I think it might be best to do it there, so we can pick it up. And I see that there's been already a bit of interactions going on there. So please feel free to post your questions there ahead of opening the Q&A to you, the audience. So I guess in a final question to the panel, you've talked about your work quite extensively, and we see that it covers a wide range of activity. you've talked about the way that the work has been designed. It's both strategically top-down as well as bottom-up in some instances, and really about opportunities that can be seized and taken forward in each of your respective spheres of influence or region of influence. Some priority areas we heard also, of course, all networks and all governments are resource limited. But we haven't touched yet on, what the pandemic has done to these networks in terms of the disruption that it has, that these networks have encountered, and the potential disconnect from these networks from the domestic ecosystem potentially, and the way what you've witnessed in the crisis and what lessons you may have now moving forward in terms of improving the resilience or just the work of these networks. So maybe I'll turn again to Caroline and Sam and Pierre-Philippe to maybe some of those during the crisis, and then what kind of sort of lessons learned for bettering or improving the networks you can share with the audience today.
Sam,
I
do you
can
want to go
maybe
first on
jump
this
in.
one?
Yeah, certainly, no problem. Thinking about disruption, I think we probably face a similar situation to many other people, and it was necessary early on to take things online. But I would say that in general, we've done a pretty good job of that, thanks to other people who've provided all the tools to help us do that. But it's actually been quite interesting in some cases that I would say it's facilitated even more contact and it's made more things possible. So, if we take the example that I know someone has put into the discussion forum of the recent Hydrogen Week, that Mario, who's one of the co-organizers of this session today, organized. I mean, we had, I think, around 800 or 900 people attending various aspects of that. This was a session that brought together UK and Canadian experts on various aspects of hydrogen. And I think there's no way we would have been able to do it with that many people prior to the pandemic. So purely from the point of view of networking technology, it's had some benefits. I mean, it has had obviously the disadvantages in terms of output, that visits haven't been possible, and there's definitely benefits to having people come face to face and meet in terms of getting to know each other and building good relationships and networks. But I'd say more broadly, there's two things that I would say have happened as a result of the pandemic, aside from all of the things related to the pandemic itself. And I think the first is that there's absolutely no doubt in my mind that the importance of science has grown because people have realized the contribution that scientists and researchers can make to policy. So I know a lot of this work, the sort of work that Sunny does with the research councils and many others on the call today, it was all going on previously. And just as many breakthroughs, discoveries, collaborations, but I think it's more immediate now in the minds of policymakers at the most senior levels, politically and officials. That's certainly true of the British government. And I think that we've even seen in the UK, many of you will be familiar with some changes that have happened as a result of this growth in the importance of science. It's been driven by other things, not just the pandemic, but the pandemic has certainly had an impact. So we've had changes to the structures of the way the UK government approaches policy, considers science almost as an important part of any policy it now undertakes, and changes to the way in which the governance happens. All of that has happened, I think, to a large extent because of the pandemic. And then the other thing that I would say is that we've seen, and not just us and people working on it, but the general public as well, just what's possible when people throw all of their resources, obviously a large amount of money, but a lot of focus and attention at one single thing and try to resolve it or fix it. And sadly, in the case of the pandemic, we didn't, we as citizens and nations and governments didn't have any choice but to do that. But I think it's been interesting to see what we can achieve working collaboratively, working globally, if we were to put a similar focus on other things. Let's take the example of quantum computing or artificial intelligence and throw just as much resources or money. Now, probably that's not going to happen because you need a driver like a pandemic to make that happen. But even if you only threw 5 or 10% of the resources and effort at time and just focused it more, I think we've all seen now what can be achieved. So that's the second big change that I think's happened, that people can see what we can achieve when we work together.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Sam, for those insights. And Caroline or Pierre-Philippe, you want to chime in?
Yeah, I mean, I 100% echo everything Sam said there. I think there's far more recognition of the importance of science and just what can be done through international collaboration when we work together. So, reducing bureaucracy, speeding up the process, all of that. So let's hope it continues. There's lots of talk that it has to continue in that frame going forward. So I think, being in the international community, we have to try and work with that and push things through. So I think it's a good place for going forward for international. The virtual world, and has it impacted our networks? I'd say, I mean, obviously there's nothing like meeting in person and going for coffees and, to build the rapport. But at the same time, I think because everyone's been working from home, there hasn't been all that time going between meetings and things. There's been more people around to kind of network with. We've sent, we've been feeding reports. We've had more time to report, so we've been feeding reports throughout the pandemic into the government machine, as it were, which has just built the network hugely. I'd say, within central government, there's probably more people aware of us now because it's getting forwarded on and people are asking for more information. So I don't think the network has contracted at all. I think it's grown. We can certainly bring together, groups of people to have those initial discussions a lot easier through Teams and have the initial workshops and meetings. I mean, we've held virtual missions. Having just, come back off a physical one, they're in no way a substitute. There's nothing like getting people in front of each other, but I think going forward we need some sort of hybrid mechanism, because this mission we've just done in person off the back of a virtual one we did 12 months ago in the middle of the pandemic has been far more effective, because we've started to build those links. They've had 12 months, probably a bit too long, but they've had time to start the conversation, start building the network. So then when you take them out to meet in person, the relationship's there and the deals are starting to get done sort of almost immediately. So certainly not a substitute for in person, but I think a hybrid model going forward. And then there's opportunities have come out of the pandemic as well. I mean, at Post, we were really sort of at the front edge of a lot of the discussions around procurement, supply chain initiatives, all around PPE, vaccine procurement, how the UK was dealing with the issue, etc. Huge numbers of conversation that brings governments together. That then makes the case for collaboration going forwards easier, because they're speaking, all the time, learning from each other going on. So, we're sort of, there was interest from the UK in biomanufacturing pre-pandemic, and that's just sort of strengthened, etc. throughout. So, hopefully we can continue with that. So opportunities have come out of it as well as some of the challenges. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Caroline. Yeah, that's great to hear. I think that both you, Sam, and you have highlighted the renewed, sadly say renewed importance of science, on the international scene, and the way that the importance of those networks has grown. So because of it, and even for policymakers as well, in your respective home countries have seen this. The power of these networks as well. We're nearing the last 15-20 minutes of our event, so I want to make sure that we have time to address some questions from the audience. But before I move to just quick questions of the audience, maybe any of our other panelists, Pierre-Philippe, Sunny, Madison, want to add something about on top of what Sam and Caroline have said?
Maybe I'll just chime in quickly to say that I believe that we need more science attachés. So maybe looking over at my colleague from the Quebec government there. One thing that you mentioned, Jean-Christophe, at the beginning was the importance of monitoring and reporting on the impact that the science attachés can have to be able to advocate for growing the network of science diplomats that we have across the world. So I think I know that there's work being done, and sharing the results of their work is something that would be very important, and to share that with the government. And maybe as an end user, especially from the industry side, one thing that we have to work on, I believe, is when we organize, for example, missions or what we call commercial missions, I feel like the science and innovation part always has to come hand in hand with the commercial part. We tend to sometimes organize them separately, and only emphasize on perhaps building academic relationships, and then on another side being completely focused on penetrating new markets and being really focused on the commercial side. But I feel like it's something that has to really evolve hand in hand.
Thanks, Madison. Actually, if I may jump in very quickly, we do have a question from the audience from Rilwan Khan, who's asking, actually, how do you assess a successful collaboration? Right? Is it through technology transfers, tech development, commercialization prospects, or are these collaborations assessed with a long-term horizon with unanticipated effects? So, how do you measure in a way, the value? I guess it's very difficult when you deal with long-term projects. So any ways for you to answer this question? And again, Pierre-Philippe, you're welcome to come in also on the question from the pandemic side as well. That any of you want to take that question about assessing collaboration, the long-term ones?
I guess if I jump in maybe from the funding agency perspective, and obviously, when as a funder, when we fund programs and projects, now the expectation is that at some point there will be a benefit or a service to society. That's the whole point of advancing science and innovation and making the world a better place. But it's tricky how to do this in UKRI. We're considering how we do this. I mean, previously we used to ask for proposal applicants to provide essentially an impact kind of plan of how they would report on this. But in the efforts of reducing bureaucracy and trying to ensure more rapid responses to funding, we've actually now removed this requirement and looking at how we can sort of measure impact instead. And it kind of depends on the type of program or project as well. If we're looking at an innovation business kind of activity, then obviously commercialization, spin-off companies, trademarks, etc., is a good measure of that. But if we're looking earlier in the sort of TRL pipeline, looking at basic research, sometimes it takes decades for that to materialize into something that's going to benefit society. So it really does depend. It's a tricky question, but I know something that sort of all funders are currently thinking about and working on at the moment.
For providing those insights from the funding perspective as well, and how you build impact in the long term. So Pierre-Philippe, I didn't mean to the insights from the pandemic. I don't know if you have or want to share any at the moment in terms of your work or the networks that you work with.
Definitely. I can just add very quickly first to what Sunny just mentioned. So I think she summed it up really perfectly on her end. So we're looking very at the commercialization aspects, and also if there's a creation of new IP. But it's very a difficult question, and it's hard on her end after when we report to our authorities, because the projects that we support, they often take at least 3 years, but often they take more than this. So it's difficult to have more budget to support more activities, networking activities, but also projects when it takes years to see and to report the benefits. So this being said, to go back to your question, Jean-Christophe, as it was mentioned, it's now easier than ever meetings online with our science attachés, as everyone is now comfortable with Zoom and Teams. It's fun to see that on our end at the ministry, we couldn't even use Teams prior to like February or March 2020. So now I think everyone are mostly up to date. So this hopefully will lead to increased cross-country collaboration and communication across networks. As an example of this, the government offices of Quebec and Wallonia, Brussels, and New York launched the Science and Technology Diplomatics in New York during the lockdown. So it's a joint initiative which will, we think, benefit all of the city's diplomatic missions. So this is a positive gain from the pandemic, and hopefully we'll have more of these cross-country collaboration in the upcoming months.
Thank you, Pierre-Philippe. So does anyone, before we move on to maybe another question, we have left on the panel, before we do that, does anybody have any other remarks in terms of the lessons learned from the pandemic and how to move forward? I think we've heard some very good insights from all of you, but if anyone wants to take the floor and add anything, then you're welcome to do so. Otherwise, we can also just very quickly go through some of the questions of the audience. So there's been a few questions. One from it's a complex one, I guess. Well, there's a few complex ones, but let's see. Let's take maybe, and I apologize in advance for selecting questions. It's really, given the amount of time we have left, it's a bit tricky. So a question from Patricia Groover about emerging technologies that you're thinking about at the moment. So, a few years ago, looking at building links in AI and quantum, but any other emerging fields that you're looking at that might produce virtual collaborations 5 to 10 years down the road. So basically, any emerging fields you see emerging on the horizon that might be
I mean, I can jump in. AI and quantum are still huge priorities. I mean, I would say still very much, well, they both are very much emerging, and I think will be there for the next few years. We're also sort of looking at space tech and some of the sort of data analytics and that sort of side from space under the whole emerging tech group bandwidth. So they're sort of, but I think those areas are going to be priorities for a few years yet.
Thank you, Caroline. Very, very interesting to hear on the space tech aspect, as being a former astronomer and space science enthusiast and following space governance quite closely. There's a lot going on indeed, especially
the other area I'll add just really quickly is on the health side is the whole of genomic surveillance and sort of, well, again, post-pandemic sort of thing, and also mRNA technologies. I mean, they've come to the fore during the pandemic, and I think are going to be looked at going forward. So that's where we're going to be focusing some of our attention anyway.
Very good. Thank you very much, Caroline, for that. Does anybody want to come in, or should I end with one
quick comment from me? I think as well as thematic areas, there's also a couple of policy drivers, such as equitable partnerships and things like equality, diversity, and inclusion as well, I think, which are going to be a big factor in how we develop collaboration.
Yeah, thank you very much, Sunny, for mentioning that. Indeed, inclusive technology and issues of inclusion and in science and prosperity and growth is absolutely key. Thank you for mentioning that. So I know that we have only a couple of minutes left, and maybe I would like to ask one last question that is more focused on the younger generation. We have a question indeed about the careers in a way, or getting into the network. So if you're an ECR or a young researcher or student, and you're looking at careers opportunities at the interface of science and diplomacy, How does one get into such careers? And you all have very diverse backgrounds and interesting ways into which you find yourself in these positions. So just was wondering if in the last 5 minutes we can spend a little bit on this this particular aspect, on getting the young generation involved.
Maybe
Anybody wants to
I'll just kind of add on
Yes,
to what I
sure.
was saying earlier. If for next gen, either if they're students right now, trainees, if they're early career researchers or scientists, do get involved. I'm going to bring back Science and Policy Exchange, who does simulations, for example, that really gets you involved in the process, become more familiar with the process on a specific subject, and it allows you to meet with and to hear from different professionals in the field. It's funny, we had a question from Patricia Gruber, and if I go back maybe 3, maybe 4 years at the CSPC, I actually sat down with her and talked about like, what is science diplomacy and how do you get involved in this world? So it's about using conferences like this one to meet with people. And honestly, I've heard so many different ways in which people get involved in science diplomacy, and it can take different forms. Before, I hadn't seen working with an industry cluster form of science diplomacy, but it's about creating links through science and across geographical frontiers. So there's a lot of different ways of going about that. And sometimes if you just look at a specific office and how do you actually get a job at that office, it might look like there's limited opportunities. But I'm going to let the other panelists chime in because I know that there's a lot of different ways that opportunities in science diplomacy can come about. And maybe I'll just add, there's also training opportunities, for example, through United Nations, who will actually have formal training on science diplomacy.
Thank you, Madison. Any insights from Sam, Caroline, Philippe, Sonny on potential opportunities or how to get into such careers?
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in. I think we've actually got a job live right now. If you look on our, I don't know where it is actually, maybe on our website or something. It's or if I, on my LinkedIn page. But so one way obviously is just to apply for things and give it a go. But what I would say is, I think I mentioned right at the beginning that generally speaking, we look for 2 things, which is that the people who are ideally in our teams is people who've got a science and a policy background. And actually, you don't need to have a very strong science background necessarily. It's great if people do, but you strengths in one or the other. And but I would say just give it a go. And above all, the most important thing I think is to be someone who is oriented on concrete outcomes and achieving things, and who has huge amounts of enthusiasm. Those I would say are more important perhaps than being an expert in policy or an expert in science. So great if you've got both of those, but I'd just say just give it a go. And I think it's an extremely exciting field to work in, and there's a huge amount that can be achieved, and it's very important, which makes it very worthwhile to get up in the morning and come and try and pursue these outcomes.
Jump in on that. Unlike my other esteemed panelists here, I'm absolutely not a scientist. My educational background is probably not what you would expect for me to do a job like this, but enthusiasm goes a long way, willingness to learn goes a long way, and experience counts for a lot as well. And I started right at the bottom, and now I'm sat here talking about science diplomacy. So as Sam said, don't be afraid to give it a go. Put yourself out there, and I think all of us would be happy to talk to anyone who would be interested in pursuing this kind of career, for better or worse.
Thank you, Sonny, and thank you very much, everybody, for this positive note to end on. Pierre-Philippe, if you want to say something for the last 30 seconds or so, and then I'll just close because I don't know what happens when the minute is up.
Very, very quickly, I think that internships are a good way to go, as you can get in touch quickly with the teams, the tasks. You get people get to know you and what you're good at, and then it's easier after, since you already know the people and the job, to apply for a job. And a lot of our interns were so good that we finally just kept them abroad. And Jean-Christian, who's based in London, is a great example, as he started as an intern science intern, more or less, and then we decided to keep him.
Thank you very much, Pierre-Philippe, and thank you all of you on the panel. It's been wonderful having you. We have 15 seconds. I think the session is going to close. So my sincere thanks to all of you, Sunny, Madison, Caroline, Sam, and Pierre-Philippe, and all the organizers for this wonderful session. I hope we get to interact again in the near future. Thank you again, everyone.
Thanks all.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank
It was
you.
a pleasure.
We already